Hello, Magic is Real listeners. This is Shannon Torrance, and today I had the pleasure of connecting with Brooke Grove. Brooke is a trauma survivor with a background in psychology. After she had a profound near-death experience, she became aware of her intuitive abilities and connection with spirit, which allowed her to be of service to others looking to heal themselves from trauma, or even just to those wanting to connect with their higher selves in a more meaningful way. Brooke is such a lovely, kind, passionate, and genuine soul, and I am so grateful for all of the beautiful wisdom she chose to share with us today. Thank you so much for being here. Now here's my interview with Brooke Grove. Hi, Magic is Real listeners. I'm Shannon Torrance, and today I'm so happy to bring to you the lovely, warm-hearted, kind Brooke Grove. I've had a chance to get to know her just over the past few months, a little bit, and I'm excited to get to know her even more. But welcome, first of all, Brooke. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
It is such a pleasure. Um, we've had a series of delays, and I always believe that spirit brings us together at the very right time. So I know we've had obstacles along the way, and so I think that this is it. We're
Mhm,
here. So, Brooke, I would love for you to tell our listeners
mhm.
who you are, what you do, what you're all about. We'll start there.
Okay, well, I am a very typical human. I
Yeah.
have my strengths and my weaknesses. I would say that most people on YouTube know me as a near death experiencer. However, I really self identify as a self healer. That's really what I came here to be and what I have made my mission to teach others to become. I really maintain that all true healing is a form of self healing. So we can reach outside of ourselves for the tools when we require them, which we all do at certain situations and times. However, it's our embodiment of those, it's our resourcing of those that really actualizes who we become. So it was through my NDE and polytraumas that my life took a very different trajectory. And I'm now an integrative healer. And I created a custom practice, which is multimodality. It incorporates psychology, spirituality, near death studies, wisdom traditions, neuroscience, and quantum physics.
And that, my friend, is why I have my guests introduce themselves, because I couldn't have said it any better and I wouldn't even want to try. So thank you for that. I love that idea that as a healer, most true, genuine healers don't say, I heal others. They say, I help others find it within themselves to heal themselves, because we all have the ability to do that. And I think that's incredible. So to start on that topic, what is it that you do help your clients achieve? What is it that people usually come to you for? And I'm sure it's all over the map. And what sorts of modalities do you use in helping them find self-healing?
Well, because of my history, I do get a lot of trauma survivors, all types of trauma survivors, from developmental traumas to what are typically called the big T's, much more significant life altering events. That said, the way trauma impacts someone, a developmental trauma can be as life altering as a big T, whereas a big T might not affect someone else and a developmental trauma does. So, there's a full spectrum there. So, I do a lot of work with trauma, multi generational trauma specifically as well. I get a lot of families that see me because there's been situations passed down the bloodline that they'd like to resolve. So, I'll work with the mom and then the daughter. And then, if it goes really well, the husbands and the dads come in. They're usually skeptical at first. No offense, beloved men.
Yeah.
That said, I also work a ton with near death experiencers, those who have recently returned and are having a hard time with their after effects, often seek me out. Also, people that have had spiritually transformative experiences, whether it's in meditation, whether it's through plant medicine, whether it's through the transition of another beloved, a shared death experience, anything in the spiritually transformative experiences. I get a lot of spiritual emergencies, people whose gifts are opening up, but they don't have the resources or the persons in their community to safely disclose to, or they try to go to a therapist or a doctor and they're pathologized. So through spirit, I am blessed and they're blessed that our paths cross and we come together. And then lastly, the largest population I also serve are intuitive children. And that's really those kids that really are gifted but are being labeled ADHD, ADD, anything they can put on them. A lot of times they present like they might have autism or Asperger's, but it's actually their psychic gifts or their intuition, and it's just their inability to be social the way that most persons are. So they're getting a DSM diagnosis when that's not necessarily the case. So those are most of the persons that find me.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I really relate with that. Just as a child, I was selective mute. And now I know what it was that I was an empath and
Mhm,
I was an HSP, highly sensitive person.
mhm,
And stimulus was just overwhelming to me. And so this was back in the when I was little, it was the 70s. And so they told my mom that I might be autistic. I wasn't diagnosed, but I remember my mom had been given some books, like, you might want to look into this because I think that's
mhm.
what your child might have. And it wasn't that at all. So but there's so much that you can offer, which I love hearing about. And in order to understand how you found yourself doing this work now, I love to hear about Brooke, who Brooke was before this near death experience, anything you're comfortable sharing about your background and how you grew up, and even maybe what your spiritual attitudes and beliefs might have been, and just what your life looked like.
Okay. Well, I grew up strict Roman Catholic in an
Okay.
Italian family, hence the eyebrows.
They're beautiful, by the way.
Thank you. So, religion was very much a part of everything. You missed church, and it didn't matter if you had pneumonia. My grandmother had the radio in there, and you were kneeling and doing everything, no matter how high a fever. God bless her. She was very devout. And so we went to Roman Catholic school as well, the entirety, preschool all the way through graduation at 18. So religion was a big part of my developmental experience. Had my grandmother not been part of the picture, I don't know that it would have been that big of an influence. She had come directly from Sicily and it was still very much, who she was. My parents, being children of the 70s, that being the height of their youth, they really kind of went a different way, but wanted to please grandma. So we followed her path. That said, from a very young age, I was very quiet. It's funny when people meet me now, I'm an ambivert. I am very open, one-on-one with my clients. If you put me in a big group, I kind of turn into a wallflower. So I still have that introverted tendency, but when I'm passionate, most people can't tell. But that said, when I was a kid, I was extremely introverted. I like most empaths and HSPs, I preferred being in nature, talking to the animals. I could often read everything that people weren't saying, and that made me uncomfortable because I knew that the adults didn't like it when I would just say something that I wasn't supposed to know. And so that was difficult as a child because going to parochial school my entire life, I remember being in my favorite nun's first grade class. And there was this big, beautiful, painting of the Garden of Eden. And she's going on this monologue about how it's all Eve's fault and the snake and da 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 da. And I just blurred out, "What about the man?" you know,
Smart kid.
I'm like, immediately get my favorite teacher upset with me, and I'm extracted from the classroom. And I learned very early on, because my whole school was run by nuns, that it wasn't okay to ask questions about the divine feminine. And that in this particular way of being in this particular religion, that the place was reserved just for Mother Mary in certain regards, and it really wasn't what I expected. I expected there to be balance and union, and them to complement each other. And while I had this deep love for Jesus, I couldn't understand why I didn't feel represented in that faith from a very young age. And so I started dissociating from the church right then and there. And that process just continued and amplified into my adolescence as I became more rebellious. And so I got a great education in Catholic school, but a lot of it was in what I didn't want to be. I feel that academically, they set me up very well. However, from a social economic perspective, I felt like I was taught more things that I didn't want to bring into the world. Too many like ways of being black and white, and not enough respect for the gray and inclusivity and other traditions. And so when I was able to leave at 17, I did, and came to California. And when I went into art school, and art wasn't fulfilling for me, it was awesome to do for yourself. And I feel like I'm returning to that now with the work I do. But putting it out there and giving it to the world for money, with an art director telling you this goes there and it didn't feel creative. It didn't fulfill me in that way that I really wanted art to heal. And a large part of that was I was recovering from very significant traumas at this point. And so my art was my medicine. And to give someone my medicine and have them tell me that's not right just didn't resonate. So I began by chance volunteering my artistic skills with abused children. There was a program at the time called Free Arts for Abused Children in Los Angeles County. And if you had an art background, you could go sit with the kids in court while they were sitting outside the room while the parents were in family court, and you did art with them. And I realized this speaks to me. Like, I
Hmm.
love this. I would sit long, long, long days while they were in trial for, 3 or 4 days. And I just resonated with it. And it turned out that one of the premier art therapy programs was right here in Los Angeles. So I applied, and gradually art therapy led me to marital and family therapy, which led me to clinical psychology, which led me to my PhD, which led me to my near death experience. So,
Yeah. Which really sounds like your soul was on this path from day one. It feels to me like you were an old soul. This was your time to come in and be a healer. And I'd love to know as we talk if you feel that's the case, because I'm talking to a lot of near death experiencers who are saying, well, I had several near death experiences, and it was almost like God, source, whatever you're comfortable calling it, just kept sort of bringing you and showing you this is your soul's path, which I think all of us get that nudge, like keep following this. It's that whole follow your bliss thing. But it
yeah.
feels like you already had this in your planted in your mind. There's something else that standard traditions and religion is missing. And that's why it sounds to me, and I'd love to hear what when we go into your near death experience, if you feel that that near death experience was part of your um, soul's evolution to becoming a healer. So, and you can comment on that now or whenever it comes up naturally for you. But yeah, and so at this point, I guess then we can sort of transition into let's talk about your near death experience and what led up to that.
Okay, well, when I was in my first master's, I was very young. I was the youngest person in my cohort. So I was 24 when I was approaching finishing. And I got really, really sick. And everybody thought that it was a byproduct of stress, that, you're taking 20 credits, you're a little young to be doing all of this, you're doing two masters at once, like you need to just slow down, was kind of the message I was getting. And yet, I had this real like drive and energy that like was seemingly just flowing through me through spirit. So it had gone effortlessly up until the final semester. And as we approached my thesis, I had disclosed my trauma history and how I had dealt with it as a child during a presentation in class. Now, I had thought that it was a safe container because being therapist, everything is supposed to be in confidence, we're holding space. And so I thought when I had that conversation, it ended there. However, I know it was done with best intentions, but it didn't feel like it at the time. And my dean really loved everything I had to share. And because I was working with adolescents and trauma at that time, she's like, you have like a great thesis right here. You should shift what you're doing. At the time, I was interested in a totally different subject. And she's like, you should really shift what you're doing and you should use your story and how you can help heal others. And I told her straight up, I have re traumatization anxiety. I believe that if I go into this area, I could just fall apart. I didn't
Mhm.
understand the chakra system at the time, but it was a very root chakra survival, this could kill me if I go back there kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'd done talk therapy, but you have to realize we were long before the days of somatic
Yeah.
experiencing and EDMR and all of that. This is way before that. So, and even PTSD at the time wasn't being diagnosed for complex trauma the way it is now. It's
Right.
strictly more for war and vets and things like that. So, I begrudgingly given to her request. And I now lovingly call that thesis Pandora's gift because when I opened it, it felt like Pandora's box.
Hmm.
Everything spiraled. I got physically sick. I did a heuristic exploration, which is where you use yourself through an immersive process to do the research. And then, so it's qualitative in the beginning, and then you take it out and you compare it quantitatively to what else exists in the field. And then I used art as the way that I explored it. So I was going really deep into therapy. I used therapy as the container to hold the space because I knew I was coming into some risky terrain. And I did the artwork in therapy, but the issue was so many emotions and feelings and memories had been suppressed that they were all overflowing when I got outside
Hmm.
of the therapeutic container. And so what ended up happening was being born an asthmatic, severe asthmatic. My lungs started having all sorts of issues. At first, they thought it was just severe asthma. Then it went as far as it's chronic obstructive pulmonary disease at 24 and not a smoker, but
Right.
that's what they diagnosed it as. Then all of a sudden, other organs started acting up. My joints started locking. I started inflaming really bad, turning purple, not really understanding. I couldn't even type my paper. Like I was getting the work done, but I couldn't type. I had to dictate everything. This isn't common for a 24-year-old. So I start reaching out to specialists. I go to all the best hospitals in Los Angeles. I'm immediately told it's autoimmune, but no doctor will give me the same diagnosis. So I've just put on a bunch of prednisone at this point. I end up just catching anything you can catch. I ended up with like three things at once that were very serious. So I ended up having to take a reprieve from the paper. I was devastated. I thought I wouldn't graduate on time. But of course, being an overachiever, I pushed myself towards recovery, got back in there. I finished that paper. Pros and cons. Yeah, I finished the paper. Yes, graduated top of my class by my own surprise for that paper because they were very proud of it. I myself at the time wasn't so proud of that paper. Okay, the paper was actually called The Wounded Healer, a heuristic exploration of re traumatization anxiety. Cut to now, it's 2021. I graduated in 2006. I don't mind dating myself. I just turned 40. Don't even bother with math.
Yeah.
That said,
Fine. And you look like you're 25, so it's all good.
I'm happy to be 40. I never thought I'd
Yeah.
make it this long. So that said, I feel like I'm just now finishing that paper. Like
Right.
I started writing it back then, and only now am I coming to where it makes sense. It's coming into completion. I'm putting it out into the world, but in a much more practical, embodied way. And so, what led to the near death experience was through all those misdiagnoses that were occurring during my master's. I had these periods where I would just get completely better. And when I would, I'd get full steam ahead. And at that point, I decided to go into my doctoral studies. Well, if your master's is going to trigger your health, your PhD will take it to the next level.
Yeah.
So I end up in an APA clinical psychology accredited program, and there was a lot of undoing. I felt very guilty for how I chose to manage my trauma, which, I now know was not my fault as a child, but at the time I felt responsible for it. And so
Mhm.
I was really trying to prove my self worth and get validation from my family and show, hey, I'm better than this and I've recovered and all of that. But the reality was, all that pain was still trapped inside, and the body got tired of holding it. The body
Yeah.
had to release it. And so after the lungs start failing, the kidneys start failing, and then nobody realizes the liver's failing because I had no symptoms, of liver failure. And I honestly do believe that was induced by medication. They were prescribing so much medication to control the lungs, to keep them operating. And then for the kidneys, trying to keep me off dialysis. And then for the pain, because this is before the opioid epidemic. Okay.
Yeah.
So this is when they were freely giving out large amounts of opiates. And I remember telling them, I have a history with addiction. Is this safe? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, we're going to monitor you. Oh, you're going to be fine. All these drugs don't interact. Don't worry about it. Okay. And of course, that wasn't the case. I intuitively knew that, although I wouldn't have been able to articulate that at that time. At this point, I'm about 28 or 29 years old. But I know something's wrong. I know that the Los Angeles hospitals are wrong in what they're telling me. I know that every doctor is making me feel like I'm either psychosomatic or I'm terminal, and there's no
Mhm.
in between, you know?
Yeah.
And I know that John Hopkins, where I'm from, has the leading autoimmune research center in the world at this time. So what do? I call them up and I beg for an appointment. Well, it takes about 6 months to a year to get into Hopkins for that appointment because everyone's trying to get in. I
Yeah.
eventually do get in, and I go back home, and I'm super excited to go see them. And lo and behold, I have one of the worst flares of my life about a day prior to going in. Now, it just so happened that the appointment they'd given me, my parents were already booked to be out of the country on a cruise. So they're coming home as I'm getting ready to go to Hopkins. Well, the pain got out of control. I called all of my doctors back here. I said to them, can I take the medication? Like, I'm just concerned. Something's off. I don't know. I feel like really out of it. I don't know if I should be taking medication. Every single doctor was like, take your medication. You just have to make it till tomorrow. You're fine, kind of thing. So I'm like, all right, they're the experts, now I would never listen to that advice, but
Yeah.
it's a very different time and experience. That said, I took the medication as directed. I remember nothing afterwards from this realm other than when I wake up from the coma 3 days later. So it was taking the medication. My liver was so compromised that it immediately shut down. And due to the speed that it shut down, it created a traumatic brain injury, it shut down the liver, and it shut down the kidneys all at once.
Wow.
So I was very fortunate because I passed out face down on the bed in my parents. They happened to come in this tiny window of time and see me. And it makes you swell up so bad when your liver fails. So I'm purple and I'm yellow and just like swollen unrecognizably. They immediately call for assistance. The local hospital immediately helicopters me to Hopkins. I have no recollection of this. This is
Right.
purely medical record.
Wow.
My NDE begins for me when I'm exiting the body in ICU. And so I'm in this scenario where I thought I was having a lucid dream. I've
Mhm.
had lucid dreams my whole life. And so I'm looking down and I'm like, is this an X-Files episode? Why? What? Like, they were all dressed funny. Like, now with COVID, we're used to seeing this kind of gear,
Mhm.
unfortunately. But back then, I'd never seen anyone with like the whole get up and the mask and
Yeah.
everything. And so I was just like, what's going on? And I'm trying to pull myself out of it. Like I'm like, wake up, wake up, wake up, and then also I'm like, well, that's my body. So then I'm like really curious and I'm like trying to come into it, but there was like this force that I could not fight that's just pulling me back. So I'm like curious about the body. And then all of a sudden it's like, the curiosity's gone. I'm just floating into something way better than anything in this realm. And that was when the cosmic kiss began. And it was just like being held. If only every mother held their children the way that this energy, this divine love holds us, this world would be a completely different place. And so even though I love my family of origin, so this is no discredit to them. My trauma did not happen by my parents. I want to clarify that. But that said, I still don't remember a time where I even allowed myself to be held like that because I always, as an empath and an HSP, felt different. I felt like if I got too close, I felt all your stuff. I had to hold your pain, or I had to,
Mhm.
and there was a lot of multi-generational trauma in my family. And so it was dangerous to become too close to people. But in this realm, I could just literally, I didn't have a body, but I was me. And you hear this all the time with near death experiences. They're ineffable. It's really difficult to put them into words. And yet your consciousness is there. I was still thinking ridiculous Brooke like thoughts,
Yeah.
like the X Files thing.
X-Files.
And
Mhm.
I was having questions as to like, oh, is this a lucid dream? Like trying to play, even when I was coming into the orb space, like even as they were holding me, I'm like, oh, this is a really good dream, And then also I was like, wait a minute, this isn't a dream because once the angelics and the different kinds of orbs and lights, I realized like this is pretty much looks like NASA, except everything's talking. But it's not talking through our language. It's talking through some inner knowing. And it's the most comforting, soothing, loving. It was like suddenly all of those things that made me feel different and alone, it was like I was in the puzzle. Like I'd been this puzzle piece on earth feeling so lost, and suddenly the puzzle was complete. And I just loved being part of that picture, and that picture loved me knowing I was part of it. And so it's just this beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place. And I really spent, it's different for everyone. Do they see the light right away? Do they have a life review? I was comatose. One thing that we found through near-death research is that comatose persons often don't have a life review. Why? We're in between still. Many
Mhm.
of us do get a choice. You don't always get a choice with a near-death experience. So I stayed in this beautiful, comfortable space for quite a while. It felt like years to me. When I woke up and they told me it'd been 3 days, I was like, 3 days? I was gone for years,
Right.
because there's no time over there. It's just not the same. Like time is a very human construct. And so I was over there and I was just being held and I loved it and I had no desire to come back, and I was just enjoying all this information that was coming in from the light, and seeing orbs that I had seen in childhood, and suddenly it was like, I know you. You were there that whole time. Like this, it was like amazing. It was like a family reunion in the best possible sense. Although it wasn't my literal family. I wasn't seeing beloveds that had crossed over. That's not how it was for me. It was much more the angelics and light beings and guides and things of that nature. And then eventually I saw the source light. And that's when the kind of trepidation, I would call it in human language, um, began, because I wanted to go to that light. It's a light that, I mean, there's no words for, and it was so kind of like just anchors you, right from that heart chakra, all three levels, like just pulls you and you want to go to it. But at the same time, it was kind of like there was this pull backwards. And I'm like, what the, like there's that human consciousness, like what's going on? Like I don't want to go back there. Everything bad happens back there, And this is when the angelics were very gentle and very kind. And we're like, you have a choice. You can go there. That's where you come from. You can go back there, or you can go back there. And I'm like, why would I want to go back there? And again, this is just a thought or an inner voice versus me saying it. And they let me know about something I probably never pondered in my human incarnation up until this point, even though I technically wasn't embodied at that moment. Um,
Yeah.
they let me know that I had this soul contract. And if I chose to go into the light, all is well. However, fine print,
Yeah.
I was going to come back. And all of these things that I had just begun to work out were going to be part of the next path. Well, if you can terrify a person in heaven, that's pretty much the only way to do it.
Yeah.
And again, they weren't saying it in any way that was scary. It was my own very, like, the parts of me that were still connected to the physical and the human. And so I like to tell my clients quite often, when you're in an NDE, you haven't fully transitioned. If you had, you'd be with God and you don't come back. It's more like being in the etheric chakras, like the soul star and right above. And so you're not embodied, but you're connected enough to still feel, some of this
Mhm.
stuff. And you're connected enough to feel that, but you're neither there nor here.
Right.
Okay. And that's an important distinction, because you can have both experiences be very real at the
Mhm.
same time. And so, um, what spirit communicated to me at that point was, well, I said, I don't want to go through this again. Basically, like, I've been through trauma's basically been all I've known since a very young age. And it's not something I don't know that I have the tenacity to go through again. And spirit was like, well, they really laid the icing on at this point. They're like, what if you go back? It's going to be harder for a while. And I'm like, a while, like, give
Yeah.
me more here. And at the time, this only came to me at the 10-year anniversary of my coma. They showed me lights in pulsations of 10. And it's only in hindsight, I know this, but it was like pulsating 10, 10, and 10 times. And so I was just like, okay, the light's pulsating at the time, right? Now I know, because of such what a monumental shift has occurred, that it was 10 years of very intense shifts. And then what they told me was, if you choose to stay and you do the work, you will come to understand it all at a time when others are awakening. And it won't just be your work. You came here to be part of that group.
Wow.
And so I was like, I'm not alone. I mean, it gives me angel chills just now saying
I
it, because
know.
it's like, there's the family, there's who, they're not just here, they're there too. And, so at that point, there's still this one part of me that wanted to go to that light. And that's when, of course, Spirit always knows what it's doing. They showed me these little beautiful flickers, which ended up being the auras of my children who weren't born for, let's see, Detch was born, let's see, Detcha was born 3 years later, and Leaf was born 7 years later. And add that up, you get 10. It comes up over and over and over again. Add up the year I was when things really began to shift, 3 and 7, 37. So there's all these like numbers that come up as well within the story, that in the beginning I was like, oh, that's hocus pocus. But now I'm like, I can't deny the synchronicities, because they just come up over and over and over again. So when I saw my sons, I knew they were messengers of some type. I knew they were anchoring me back to the body. I knew that their lights were not angelic. I knew that they had some purpose into why I was coming back. Um, at the time, again, did not know they were my children, did not know what their purpose would be. but I was mesmerized by them enough to say, I want to go back. And at that point, I asked Spirit, what do I do to get back? Because I was pretty enchanted and didn't want to leave. And they told me to follow the light, unlike all others, which is when I noticed there was this horrific light coming from the back that was not cosmic. It was not divine. It was very earth based. And so I looked at it, and it was like the moment I looked at it, I was catapulted back into the body. And it just happened to be a flashlight. They were checking my vitals for signs of activity. And that was my welcome back to the physical.
Wow. Brooke, yours is one of my favorite near-death experience stories, but it's also, I think, because of the way that you tell it. I
Mhm,
think that all the people that I've spoken with and most of the people I've watched share their stories, there's such parallels in there. It doesn't mean that all the details are the same, as you said. And it also depends on whether they were in a coma or whether they were just sort of peeking over the edge or whether they
mhm,
were really close to death.
mhm,
But they all have the similar theme, and there's
mhm,
so many of them. I mean, telepathy is one of them, where you just
mhm,
absorb all of this information. There's no talking, it's all just knowing and communication through your souls. And the other is that feeling, or that sense of beings telling you, "You can stay here, and that's fine,"
mhm,
as you said, "but you're gonna have to this is gonna need to be worked out whether it's now or later," and I'm more of a devil you know kind of person. It's like, well, I already know what that is.
mhm,
And also so many of them have told me the same thing, that they were told, it's gonna be hard for a while. I'm just giving you a heads up. It won't be easy. And they
mhm,
still chose to come back
mhm,
for their own reasons. Like you said, mostly it was they were having children, or somebody or their children needed them,
mhm,
or they thought the same thing. Well, I already know what it's like to be in this person in this life,
mhm,
so may as well continue on that path rather than start over, reset, and have to do it again. So it would be like, one step forward, 10 steps back. So
mhm,
it's just so beautiful. And I've also the theme of not wanting to come back. None of them say, oh yeah, get me back there,
mhm,
because this is such a difficult place to be with all its beauty,
mhm,
with all the joy that there is in life. It's also a struggle. For
mhm,
no matter what, we've all experienced traumas. They're varying degrees, like you said.
mhm,
And so I find that so fascinating. When you came back into your body, did you feel
mhm,
physical pain
mhm.
right off
I
the
would
bat?
say that was probably the hardest part, is the juxtaposition between where I was and what I came back to.
Yeah.
I had been declared likely brain dead. They'd read me my last rites, being that my family was Catholic. And so my ex-husband, one of the best choices he made at the time, because like many NDEers, he couldn't handle the rapid shift that occurred when I came back and
Yeah.
completely changed. And that's okay,
Mhm.
amicable.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful person. But that said, he did know that without my cognition, without my mental abilities, I would not want to survive as a vegetable.
Mhm.
And so the doctor said the one hope that they had for saving my brain was to put a PICC line directly into the brain. And so that's what they had done. And so when they put a PICC line into your brain, they have to strap you down so that you're not moving. And so because with coma, you have involuntary movements. And so just from the muscles. And so even though I'd been not moving and as, unconscious for 3 days, I was strapped down and they thought I was brain dead. So when I opened my eyes, I was trying to talk. Now I have no idea. I'm comatose. I'm intubated. So there's an injury. I have no clue. And I can't move. So I immediately try to use all my energy to thrust myself up and say something to the nurse. I can't do anything. And she doesn't notice that I'm in there. She just keeps taking the vitals and moves away. And at that point, I'm trying to like look around and tell, and I can barely move my neck because of the PIC line. And then I'm like feeling the intubator, and I'm just like, how, like, what the, and I'm looking around, my contacts are out of my eyes, and I'm practically legally blind. So I'm looking around like, what? And squinting, trying to read the board. And then I kind of see the date, and I'm like, that's not possible.
Hmm.
So it was very scary. And I kept trying to get their attention to come back to me, and nobody was coming. No family came in, and I realized they don't know I'm awake. And so I very sincerely called upon the angelics and things I experienced. And I was like, if you're real, I need your help. And the first word or intuition I had was panic. And I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it got my vitals up to where they were able to say, hey, she's in there, you know?
Right.
So then they came over and they noticed like everything is going haywire. And I blinked the one eye I could move without hurting the PIC line on this side of my head. And at that point, they're like, she's communicating. And I was like, yeah, I can't wave or say hello, but I'm in here. Um, but it was tough because as I've spoken about this before, my history re-authored the story to many people. Because my doctors had prescribed me opiates, everyone disregarded everything else that had happened. And they said, here's a drug addict who relapsed, who took too much medication, and it was a suicide attempt. And so I come out of this beautiful heavenly experience. Mind you, I'd been suicidal in the past, and I have no problem owning that as part of my trauma history. But I was not suffering from suicidal ideation when I took that medication. Moreover, had I been, they still should have had the compassion to
Yeah.
deal with someone. If someone's attempted their life, more compassion, please,
Hmm.
not less. And so it was very hard because I noticed right away because I wake up and my after effects are completely on. So you've got someone who can't see objects clearly because they have no glasses or contacts, but they can see your aura and they can read what you're thinking
Hmm.
and all these other things. And I was like, why does everyone think I tried to kill myself?
Right.
And so then it became like the trauma of, well, my family's rushing in now and saying, yay, and at first. And then there's this dramatic shift. And I mean, they hadn't even shifted yet, but I could see it coming. And so I was very like, I put that body armor up you have as a trauma survivor and was kind of like, I'm not going to let it phase me. I'm not letting it get in, but there was this grief for where I had just been and where I was thrown back into, and almost a discounting of the experience automatically because it was like, had the after effects not been so loud and like in my face and basically like, we're here, you can't
Hmm.
make us go away, it would have been really easy for me to say it was just a dream
Right.
because I wanted it at that moment to have just been a dream. It would
Hmm.
have been easier for my ego. It would have been easier for me to go back to the life I'd known, to the career I'd known. And instead, by slowly, because it took me a good 7 years, embodying the gifts and walking away from everything, I had to really get comfortable with everything that made me uncomfortable.
That's so well said. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think I often hear the same thing that I love that you do reintegration work too, because so many people think, oh, I wish I could have a near death experience. That would be so cool.
Yeah.
And I think from what I understand, it's a gift, but also a curse. And everyone's story is different. But it sounds like the closest thing I can think of is I'm a very vivid dreamer too, where when I'm in that dream, that's my reality.
Yeah.
And I've always had, ever since I was little, I had these very, very vivid dreams where I would wake up and be disoriented
Mhm.
between what world is real? Is this real? And I always, now it's starting to make sense to me, but I always said to my sister, I remember saying, like, I always have this thing in the middle of the night where I wake up and think, I lost someone. I forgot someone. Like someone's missing. Something's missing. And it just occurred to me this week, even that I was like, that's probably me remembering where you were, remembering that where I come from,
Mhm.
or remembering another life where I keep thinking that there's like a husband I forgot or like a child. And I always kept saying, there's someone that's I would wake up gasping and going, who did I forget? I forgot someone. There's someone I forgot. And I think that it's very possibly could be I'm forgetting me. I'm forgetting
Mhm.
my soul, and I'm forgetting my soul family.
Mhm.
Or it's another life thing. But I find that so interesting, and also how hard it would be. Also interesting is how hard it would be to come back, because when you're there, that's reality.
Mhm.
And then when you're here, this is my reality.
Mhm.
And it's interesting that your soul can exist in two different dimensions
Mhm.
and more. But
Definitely.
yeah, and I know that you did mention, and I've heard you say this before in other interviews,
Mhm.
that you woke up being able to see people's auras,
Mhm.
and you started to be able to sort of hear their thoughts. What did that how did you experience that, just sort of on a day-to-day basis, and what did it feel like to you? Was it sort of like this claircognizance feeling of, "I just know they're thinking that," or did you hear
Oh, no. It was
yeah,
all the
what
14s turned on to the
yeah,
max style.
so it sounds like, yeah.
You have been a born empath and HSP. You know how it is to just have that clairsentience, that
Mhm,
knowing. Okay, so I had had that my whole life, and I had turned it off a lot with some choices I had made, like the self medicating away the trauma, et cetera, et cetera. So it's out of practice. It's rusty. But then I had also revved it back up doing psychology because it was just part of the work, the exchange of therapy. um, However, when I woke up in the hospital room, it was like suddenly, it wasn't, the way I always imagined auras when people describe it, because people are like, oh, what's my aura color? Oh, you have
yeah.
this one aura color and it's just like fixed. No.
Right.
It was like, oh, everyone is an Alex Gray painting and it's
Wow.
always moving, you know?
Yeah.
And so they have this, yes, everyone does have a predominant aura color, which is like their baseline. But on top of that is everything else that's going on in the field. And it's literally just shifting and moving and like all the time. And the more activated they are, or stimulated they are, the more the mind or the spiritual body or the etheric or all of the subtle bodies are moving, the more electrified that aura is going to be.
Mhm.
So there was that. Then there was the clairaudience, where a doctor would be telling me, you shouldn't do this for your health. And they'd be thinking, oh, I need a pack of cigarettes.
Right.
Be like, oh, yeah, and your lungs aren't looking really good either. And I'm like, wait a minute, I can see like
Mhm.
stagnation on the lungs. And then I'm just sitting there like, what? Like, I'm not trained to do any of this. Am I hallucinating? Like, I really went through a period where I was like, is this a flashback? Like, what is happening to me? Like, it really felt like a hallucinogen had been given to me and just
Mhm.
turned up all the way. And it was terrifying at first. I mean, I really don't know what else to call it. Had I not been blessed by synchronistic events that occurred right before the coma, that were grounding resources. I had been, as I'd mentioned, I'd been in clinical psychology. I knew for whatever reason I couldn't stay on that path just months before the coma. So I went to Palo Alto and I started studying transpersonal psychology, where I met my first group of shamans who become very important because later I go down that path. But they ended up, one of them came up to me and she was from First Nations of Canada. And she's like, I have a message for you. Do you want to receive it? God bless her, because so many intuitives and mediums and whatnot do not ask for permission. So thank you to this
Yeah.
day for doing that. And she did ask for permission and I gave it to her. And she goes, in the fall, you are going to have a choice. She's like, it's your choice, stay or go. But it's a big choice. And I was like, okay, toss that into the random,
Yeah.
bag. And but I mean, I was curious about it. Um, but I started having openings of gifts when I was on this spiritual indigenous land for this particular retreat. And then the coma ends up happening just a little bit later. At that same retreat, I start working with a Taoist master, and he had described some of my guides to me. which I didn't tell him at the time because I wasn't a full believer, was very much how I had seen them as a child. So when I'm in the hospital room, as soon as they finally give me my phone and I've got one pick line out to type, I write him and I'm like, this is what they look like. This is how they this is how they deliver information. This was not a dream. And then he wrote back parts of it I didn't describe. And at that
Wow.
point, I was like, game on. I'm like, I'm not going to sit in here and be scared alone because it's ICU, it's glass. Every time they were yelling code red or code blue, my gifts meant I had to see someone's soul transition.
Hmm.
I'd never seen that before. I had felt people transition. It's very different watching them actually leave the soul body, out of the
Right.
human. And so it was very scary at first. And then after I talked to him, I was like, you know what? All I have to do is ask. Like that's pretty much the
Hmm.
law of it all, right? Just ask and they'll help. And so that's what I did. I mean, tearfully, I begged for assistance, and through a very heart-centered way. It wasn't. I owned that I was scared, but I said, "You've given me this for a reason. You gave
Yeah.
me this as a child, and somehow it turned off. Well, now it's all the way up. What are we gonna do with it?" And they gave me tidbits and tidbits, and it was very push and pull for a very long time because I wanted to take what was happening to me and integrate it into the path I was already on.
Hmm.
I wanted to stay in clinical psychology. I looked out to people that were doing it, Dr. Stephen Farmer, et cetera, people that were clinical psychologists, but were integrating the metaphysical and the mystical. But every time I tried to do it, I'd get sick again.
Wow.
Not full on comatose sick,
Yeah.
but the autoimmune would come back after periods of full remission. And so it started to become like I'm in this ping pong machine, this metaphysical ping pong machine, where my gifts are very heightened by certain things. They're very, I can turn them off by other things. And there was that the 7 years I've talked about, which were incredibly awful. It was pretty much a dark night of the soul, intermittently, but it was more dominant than intermittent because I didn't want to be here. And this is the part you already alluded to, whereas there's this, misnomer of near-death experiences, whereas then you come back and you have this like heightened knowledge and you have this beautiful transformative experience. But the reality is you have to integrate that, and if you come into an environment where that's not readily accepted, a family where that's not readily accepted, a religious upbringing where that's not readily accepted, or you were trained as a scientist where that is not readily
Hmm.
accepted. I mean, every single one of my gifts, I would sit there and be like, okay, I'm schizoaffective, I'm possibly schizophrenic, but then I'm like, but I'm oriented times four. So I'm like going
Hmm.
through, like, I was constantly putting myself through psychological batteries. I went to see all of these therapists and great doctors. Everybody kept telling me I was totally okay. And then I'm like, but I'm not telling you the whole story.
Right, because so many people won't understand it. And
Exactly.
I would think not only is there the danger of, as you said, being diagnosed with something, but there's also just sort of being alienated because people don't know what to make. Like, is she crazy or is this real? But also, I would imagine it's difficult to have the knowledge that you have and have the gifts that you have, the abilities that you have, and then just to not have them understood. It sort of minimizes this profound experience that you had. It may not minimize it in your own mind, but it's like, how does it doesn't honor the experience that you truly had, even probably trying to convey it to others. It sounds like it's hard to put into words.
Definitely. And I did allow it. I did allow myself to minimize it. And this is where trauma becomes a big part of what I believe I'm here to do, and my mission to serve is I know for a fact that speaking about trauma in relationship to NDE, it's becoming more mainstream now. But when I submitted my first paper on it a few years ago, nobody wanted me talking about it. Okay. And I really had to go outside of the popular NDE channels and start talking about it, because the reality is we lose in the first 7 years to suicide a significant amount of experiencers. In children, it's 21%. In
Wow.
adults, it's about 7%. I feel that that's an
Mhm.
underestimated number because I feel like they're not disclosing, they're not seeking help. Okay.
Right.
It's also, in my opinion, an outdated statistic. That said, there were many times where I felt I was going to be part of that group. And it was because I was giving my power away. Like I was saying, okay, well, psychology's right because you
Mhm.
can't have these gifts and be oriented times four. Or my doctors are right, you can't have spontaneous remission and like be healthy for 10 years. Like I just kept giving my power away because as a trauma survivor, it had been taken away from me at such a young age and never fully reestablished. I had tried to reestablish it outside of myself, not internally. And so the great gift of my NDE and those very difficult years of reintegration was that it forced me to come to a place where I'm not powerless over this. I'm powerful over it. I determine where this story goes. And something I never imagined 10 years ago this would be said to me, but I'm giving a talk in a few months. And someone in a very prominent position in the ND community said, she asked me what I'm do. She's like, I intuitively picked you. I know nothing about you. So tell me a little bit about what you do. And I told her about my practice. And she's like, how blessed are you? She's like, you took it and you made something your own. You're not working a 9 to 5. You're not still, in that. You're not just using a part of the gifts. You really took it all and
Yeah.
made something that honors every path you walked. And I had told myself that lovingly and gently, but I don't think I'd allowed myself to really receive it until another person said it. And my clients say it all the time, but hearing someone who many years ago I saw from across the room in a conference and thought, oh, well, they're never going to reach out to me. I'm not going to be
Mhm.
that person. I'm not part of that group. I'm too different. I'm not getting my MD. I'm not finishing my PhD. You know, it just proves that none of those things matter. It's about our personal empowerment. It's about our relationships to both our strengths and our weaknesses, because I'm very aware of my shadow. I'm very aware of where it comes into play with all of this. And I allow it to teach me just as much as the light.
Right. Yeah, that's everything you said. There's so much in there that resonates with me. Also just how easily we give away our power is one of the themes, and how we reach out for other people. And I've talked on this podcast a lot about how I have done 12-step recovery for love addiction, which is really just lacking that connection with source and ourselves in relation to source and as part of source. And so we end up um, not valuing ourselves, second guessing ourselves, saying, "Oh, I don't belong in the light. I don't deserve to shine my light," and all of that kind of keeping small, but reaching out for other people, asking for validation. And I think that's so much of what near death experiences teach people, is that all of us are equally beautiful, equally important, equally, and not in the sense that you're beautiful, you're smart, not our we're not our accomplishments. We're enough just because we are a soul, and that's what God wants us to understand, is that we are all worthy, beautiful souls. We're
Mhm.
flawed. We all have our flaws and our go-to coping mechanisms that may not be the best, and that's hopefully what we're learning. And I also really love what you said when you talked about your autoimmune disease. I think it's important to touch on that as well, because I've done a lot of research on the mind body connection.
Mhm.
And just because I've had things too, chronic conditions that really trace back to traumas that, again, I feel fortunate to have not had any big T traumas.
Mhm.
But even in being an HSP, having
Mhm.
had these traumas that caused me to shut down and be in therapy at age 2 and that sort of thing, it's important to sort of understand that so many of these autoimmune diseases, and I know that not all of them are caused by trauma, but so much of it is our body responding to stress? Either it manifests as PTSD or it manifests as
Mhm,
what I have, which is muscle tension dysphonia, where it all collects in my throat and my muscles squeeze so tight that I can't speak,
mhm,
which kind of goes back to being selective mute, and I'm a voice actor, so it shuts off my ability to
mhm.
speak freely, and I think it's important too to because I think you really touched on something that's important is that the trauma becomes trapped in your body, and it
Mhm,
expresses in itself in so many different ways that a perfectly healthy young
mhm.
person can really truly have these traumas express themselves in very physical ways. And I'd just love to hear more about
Definite.
that because I think part of your work is helping people. I don't know if it's release the trauma. I don't know what words you would choose, but you can kind of explain your thoughts on that.
Well, as I explain often to clients, it's the trauma, there's a multitude of pathways trauma comes in. We have the multi-generational, which in my opinion, every family has some variation
Yeah.
of. Okay. That's part of being in relationship with others. Okay. It's the severity and the spectrum that vacillates a bit.
Mhm.
And then there's the actual DNA, the genetic imprinting on the DNA, what was chosen by the last person and how much of that did you inherit. And
Mhm.
I personally don't see genetics as a like it's going to be this way because you got the gene. It takes situational activation for a gene. Epigenetics has taught us that. So it's not an excuse at all in my perspective, but if you're carrying the DNA for it and you happen to have the situation, you happen to have it usually come alive. Then the other pathway is we have the subtle bodies, we have the etheric, the spiritual, the mental, the emotional, the physical. When I have clients who, will like sometimes be like, oh, I just wish I would have gotten yada yada, that's physical because they're having anxiety. And I'm like, actually, you got the nicer version. It's in the mental but emotional body. It hasn't quite hit the physical. The
Mhm.
physical is the hardest to actually get rid of because at that point it's come through all the other fields and now it's like screaming at you, hey, I'm here. And so
Uh-huh.
often in this culture, what's very polarizing and for someone like myself triggering that is concerned about holistic health is we romanticize taking care of physical illness. If someone tells you they're physically ill, and I know this from my own experience, and of course, our culture, if you tell someone you're physically ill, may I pray for you? May I do this? May I, their heart opens and expands because they immediately make the assumption it's not your fault and you're suffering. However, if you acknowledge that you're suffering from bipolar disorder or, major depressive disorder or any type of suicidality, and you're just honest, they shun you and run the other way.
Mhm.
When in fact, those disorders, maybe not fully the pathologized versions, but some variation because all mental illness exists on a spectrum, just like all physical illness, they have occurred to some level as a pathway to that physical illness. In my case, I'll give you a clear example. PTSD was not yet allowed to be diagnosed for trauma like I endured. Okay. Mine was recurrent. It occurred from the time I was 12 to 17. That makes a huge imprint on a child. Okay. Now, what ended up happening was I developed major depressive disorder. Well, what is depression? It's inflammatory thoughts turned inward. What did my body end up doing to cope with the amount of inflammatory thoughts I was turning towards myself? It started developing an inflammatory illness. It literally tried to take what I was doing and push it out. And so, one of my mentors is Dr. Gabor Mate, and he talks all the time about like it's in the body's brilliance that it is really trying to detox this thing. So it's by going to the core and accepting, all these roots, peeling back this onion, through compassion and inquiry, asking a question. And before anyone, attacks me on YouTube, I'm not saying your cancer is your fault.
Right.
Okay. I'm saying there was a sequence of events, and ways that you internally and externally responded
Mhm.
in relationship to your genetics, in relationship to the culture and the climate of the times. And all of these things create the perfect storm. What's important about knowing that, it comes back to the power again. We can be in a climate like right now where there's so much uncertainty, when there's so much fear, where there's so much trepidation and so much polarization between sides. And without getting political, you can choose to be Switzerland.
Mhm.
You can choose to be
Yeah.
neutral. You can say, I'm not giving that my power.
Yeah.
I will be aware of it. I will do my best to stay healthy. I will make good choices. I will protect my mental body. I will protect my spiritual body with whatever practices work for me. If it's just walking in nature, that's great. If it's, prayer, whatever, it doesn't matter. All it is that each part of our bodily system, not just the mental and the physical, needs self-care. And if we're taking care of the energy of our body, if we're taking care of the spirit, the mental, the emotional, and the physical are going to have a type of muscle memory for recovery that's far more pronounced than if we're ignoring the bodies we can't see in favor of the ones we hear, feel, and see. Okay? Because, in my humble opinion, the strongest ones are the ones beyond traditional sight.
Mhm. I That's the most beautiful explanation I've ever heard. And I you may have read Anita Morjani's Dying to Be Me. She talks a lot about that, and I know that people get very upset when
Mhm,
because it sounds as if you're saying, "Well, you caused your cancer." And she said, "No, it wasn't." Like you said, it's one part DNA that you're more prone to something, and then it
mhm,
takes a trigger. And then when you're under stress and you don't love yourself, you have low self-esteem, you've experienced trauma, then your body goes into an inflammatory state, and it's
mhm,
really trying to protect itself, just like PTSD isn't actually a disorder. It's your
mhm.
brain doing what it's supposed to do to protect you.
Exactly.
It puts your brain on high alert so that its purpose is that way next time something happens, I'll be ready. It's a
Mhm.
survival instinct. It's actually not a disorder, but it just becomes disordered in the sense that your brain doesn't know when to stop
Exactly.
sending the neurons that are saying, danger, 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 which is very traumatic to live through. In this, it's unfortunate that it becomes that. But I just love the way that you explained that, and because I think it's so important for, I think, people to understand, not that they should put that pressure, like, if I stress out, I'm gonna get something. It's not that.
Mhm,
I think it's important to recognize that this is why healing is possible.
mhm.
And some things like fibromyalgia, technically there's not a cure. PTSD, there's not a cure,
Right. Yeah.
but you can learn to walk alongside it and manage it and learn coping skills and do your best to release that, as much of that trauma from your system as is humanly possible, I'll say, because
Definitely.
obviously.
You learn to use it
Yeah,
as an ally. Like for
yeah,
me, when I'm having inflammation, which I had recently, very recently,
yeah,
it's like, okay, I'm swelling up. What is this telling me? What does this
yeah.
have to do with what's happening here and now? How am I managing my stress? What have my food choices been? Like, let's get in front of this, because before it actually becomes I'm hooked up to a nebulizer to breathe.
That
You know,
is
so it's
that's it.
really
Yeah,
they're really defense mechanisms, and they're there to be protective. I mean, defense mechanisms get a bad rap from psychology, from persons that have them, but we all have them. And they were adaptive when they began. The problem is they become maladaptive because we lean on them, we give them our power. And that's one of the biggest, I think, farcities of our culture, is that it has really taught us that everything is more powerful than we are.
mm,
And the truth is, whether you're spiritual, you're religious, you're agnostic, you're atheist, I don't care. There's room for everybody at the
yeah,
table. uh Ultimately, it's that coming back into your own power, realizing that you're the sovereign integral of your field. Nobody else is an expert on you. Nobody else knows what you've been through. No matter what they tell you, no matter how deep the programming or the limiting beliefs go, you can reauthor that story. Heck, you can reauthor your own soul contract,
right.
but you've got to do the work. And that's really, we're in this quick fix society that wants a pill or wants, just to make it go away, like in some easy way. But the reality is you can't rush healing. Authentic healing is, it literally is the caterpillar going into the cocoon. You are going to turn to mush. But if you stay in that cocoon, you will come out a butterfly.
That's amazing. That's so beautiful. Gosh, everything you said is so beautiful, and I can see why people go to you for the services that you provide, because I think you do have a really beautiful way of eloquently explaining this, but not in a way that is for the agnostics out there or the atheists out there. You're still very grounded in the way that you present your perspective. And I think that's important because, like you said, it doesn't matter um, what your belief system is. We're all sort of made up of the same stuff, and call it what you will. We'll call it soul, someone else will call it the machine, whatever it is. But I think that's so interesting, and I love to talk about that because I've done a lot of research on it myself, about the mind body and inflammation and how your body responds to emotional stuff. And so now that you're doing this work, I know that one of the things that you do is, you can help you're going to have to put it into the words, but it's something that you do where you can you have clients come to you for, I want to say, spiritual guidance. That's not really the right word, but can you kind of explain, because I know how is it that you use these enhanced abilities
Mhm.
that I know we're all capable of tapping into, but your ability to see, know, hear, um, in what ways do you use those abilities? I want to say acquired on the other side, but really sort of given back to you in order to help your clients.
Well, it really varies.
Mm,
I wish I could tell you I had a prescription pad that was one size
yeah.
fits all. It'd be a much easier answer, but that's not how it goes. What has really happened is, it sounds so silly, and when they were saying it to me, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm such an '80s kid." But this kept being like this mantra. But when I was really struggling to walk away from psychology and I kept trying to find a home in like other healing modalities that were very specific, like, you know, Reiki or transpersonal
Mhm.
psychology or whatever, and none of them were fitting. I liked snippets, but they weren't fitting. And I kept hearing the mantra from Field of Dreams, which was, if you
If you
build it,
build it,
they
they
will
will
come.
come. Yeah.
And I was like, this is so cheesy. And I just like couldn't get over like the cheesiness of it. But then like your team communicates as you are. So they were kind of telling me something about myself, which was that I needed to like have some monkey medicine, as we call it in shamanic terms, and embrace it with a little bit more levity and humor. And or Leo medicine, if you want to go astropsychology. And so I just started experimenting. And through that process, people started coming. And through the process of, okay, well, this is what they're dealing with. I'm going to try this toolkit. And this is what they're dealing with, this toolkit. And then it eventually came to where I did have a formula, which was, I'm going to open a ceremonial space. And this is I'll give you a generalized description of the
Yeah.
session. The session's 2 hours. Okay. I do all of it distance. And that's because I'm working in the quantum field and the physical body is giving off all of its own auric information. It's way easier for me to go deeper if I don't have the physical body right there.
Yeah.
Okay. The one blessing of COVID is I have not had to sell anybody on that. They're all
Mhm.
like,
Right.
let's do it from afar. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
So I go into shamanic ceremony about 2 hours before I work on someone. I do not collect any information on the person prior to that. They send me an email. I screen all my emails personally. The reason is I have to go through and make sure it's a fit for the work. If it's
Yeah.
not a fit for the work, I refer them to someone else. If it's a fit for the work, I welcome them to when I have an opening. And then I do send them a very, I think it's brief reflection form. They seem to think it's intense. Um, but the irony is I only skim that form, and I tell everyone this and they still send me like 20 pages.
Yeah.
I skim this form, and the reason I'm skimming it, I do not want my analytical, psychologically
Mhm.
trained mind to get involved. So I am looking for the word spirit points me to. Okay. And it can
Ah.
sometimes make no sense, but those are the words I pick out. And from that, I create 3 goals with spirit. And then I open my medicine space and I call in the 4 directions and open my own soul star chakra and open the space for the person, set up the violet flame to catch up anything that's released that I don't want to linger in my home. And then from there, it's really about once I get a grid set up, actually the rug I'm sitting on is like 6 by 6, and it's where I put my clients' grids. And so depending what's called for, I mean, it can be all sorts of things. Most of the time it's minerals that I'm using for their different vortex systems. Sometimes it's random. Sometimes I'll get told, use honey. Okay.
Uh-huh.
So I go and grab honey because we need something to stick to a certain vortex. Other times we need to clear something or we need to ground it. So I mean, I have all sorts of stuff up there on the altar: water, flowers, sand from the beach, seashells, anything from the earth that's going to assist with the process. My shamanic dagger. So I go into this ceremonial space once their grid is set. Then, when I have their permission, it's about 2 hours later after I've set all this up, then I open their actual field. And I'm talking to them the whole time,
Yeah.
letting them know what I'm doing. But as I'm doing it, I have a notepad and I'm talking to spirit the whole time. And I am moving all over this 6 foot thing. I mean, the reason I can't do video sessions, I have so many people ask for video. I'm like, you wouldn't keep up, and
Yeah.
you wonder the whole time what I'm doing. And I'd probably never get another client because they'd be like,
What are you
what?
doing? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's because the type of energy medicine that I'm doing, I need to be moving the whole time. I'm using the light that they're giving me, the quantum light, and then the angelics who are working with me, and I'm asking them to help me maneuver, move stuff, throw it out, cut it out, put it into the whatever, whatever they call for. And spirit's very direct. So from those 3 goals, usually a theme comes out. Now, the person may have come to me for PTSD. That might be their
Mhm.
chief symptom. But spirit shows me something that's really underneath all the
Mhm.
PTSD. So that's where we'll go in the first session. I'll include the PTSD in the goals, but we go where spirit says to go. And they give me information. I mean, a random example, the horse. Okay. So
Mm.
I'm like working on someone and I'm in a chakra and it has absolutely nothing to do with anything that's coming up. And there's a horse. And I'm like, okay, horse. It means nothing to me in that moment. Spirit clarifies when they want to clarify. One of their rules is they like to give me information and then they like me to ask the person because it helps that person really tune into their self healing, or what does that mean to you? It's not me telling you what a horse means, it's you tapping into where did the horse come from, or what significance is a horse to your life.
Mhm.
And it's fascinating because I pull the cards before I do the energy medicine. I do not look at them until we're done the energy medicine. Sometimes when I pull the cards, I'm like, well, this will be interesting.
Yeah.
My human, it's always there. And then I actually come to them at the end and I'm like, spirit is brilliant,
Mhm.
because it all just aligns. But I do the energy medicine. I then very briefly look at the cards. I seal up the ceremonial space because it's very important for me to disconnect from the quantum before I come back in to speak. And then I call them if they're in the United States. I Zoom call them if they're international. And we talk for an hour. And it just depends where they're at. Some people, it's really important to go through the whole field in a
Yeah.
first session. Other people, it's very esoteric to even talk about the chakras. So I come up with fun little names and other ways of describing it. And then other people, the trauma has really locked itself into certain parts, or the spiritual opening is in a certain part. And so we focus really intimately on that particular part. I'm always making sure they're super grounded at the end. And then my favorite part, not necessarily their favorite part, um, after 3 days, I give them 3 days to allow all of the energy medicine and the integration to percolate. And then after 3 days, I send them their homework. And that is a very long email. But that is because that's where the magic happens. Like, I can clear a whole bunch of things, I can move it around, but it's what you do with it.
Mhm.
It's the same with any type of medicine, any type of healing. And so I send them a lot of homework because some things will resonate, some won't. Some will be something you go to an emergency, some will be an everyday practice. And so I always ask them to keep it, highlight it, go back to it. And the highest compliments when they only come 1 or 2 times, and then they're like, the homework's doing it. And so
Yeah.
then, awesome, because I was a therapist and they had to come every week for
Mhm.
years. And I didn't see those kind of shifts. So when
Right.
I have people like that, it's amazing. And then I have other people I work with like every 4 weeks for, 8 months to a year, and then they're off on their way. So it just depends. But it's all in all, it's about 4 hours. So I only see about 2 people a day
Yeah,
because
that's a
then I have
lot.
to clear the space afterwards. But it's
Yeah.
beautiful. I mean, even when I'm clearing attachments, entities, like what most people would consider the darker stuff, I still feel like I'm playing and making art because I'm not doing it alone. I'm not channeling. I don't open myself up to channeling personally, just because
Mhm.
as a very open person, I've had some stuff come in and I don't want to be hijacked. But I'm communicating, and the boundaries I have with spirit is you can give me anything as long as it's a conversation, you know,
Mhm.
and we have that boundary. And so even with the clearing, attachments and parasites and stuff, it's still, I feel safe. I know I'm protected. I know it's not going back on them. And at the end of the day, I mean, honestly, it's such a joyful experience. I can never say that I left my psychology office as happy as I leave my medicine space.
Yeah, that sounds so rewarding and exciting, and I would imagine that it's like I'm sure it's like this in therapy as well, but everybody's so different that each time you do it, it's a whole new set of things. I mean, this sounds like my dream job. It's it's amazing, and I also have wanted to work with you for a while, and the timing wasn't lining up, but, I that really intrigues me, and I love the way that you describe your work because it just sounds like such a, just such a meaningful thing to be able to give to people. And I know that you said you do set boundaries. So much of what you do sounds like similar to mediumship in the sense that we do you're really surrendering to spirit. You're really trusting what they're giving you. You're really just acting as a channel to pass on information, which is a lot of self trust and it's a lot of trust in spirit. And I wonder if because you had a near death experience, it makes it easier to trust. Because I know as a medium myself, I still do the thing where I give readings, and I just thought last night, why am I so hard on myself when I can go back and I can think about 30 readings I did that totally resonated with the person and that even my jaw dropped, and that every time I'm about to do one, I'm like, "What if it doesn't work this time? What if I can't do it?" Or I'll leave going, "Did I make all that up? Is there
Yeah.
some way I could have read into it or maybe they just heard what they wanted to hear?" And then I have to constantly check myself and say, "You believe in this, so why are you doubting spirit? Why are you doubting your connection with spirit?" And I wonder, I'm sure you're a human too, so I wonder if you ever because you've been there, if it sort of helps with that doubt, or if sometimes you feel like, "Am I off today?" Or, "How am I" just as the human side, like you said, your mind might get involved sometimes.
Yeah, I think it does help, but you're still very much human. I go
Yeah.
what you just described, I go through it all of the time.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know you've interviewed my friend Peter Panagore, and one of the things that I completely concur with Peter is that it's not belief, it's knowing. And when you
Yeah.
get into that human mind trap or the monkey mind, it's like your lower mind trying to tell you, well, what if it doesn't work? I need to believe it. No, you don't need to believe in anything because you already
Right.
know in its existence, its power, its magnitude. Therefore, all you have to do is trust. And so that's where it's like, whenever I feel myself having that like trust versus mistrust, like feeling like
Yeah.
toddler, developmental stage when I'm like, I don't want to do my work today, and I'm going through that. It's more something that it's causing me to say, okay, what's going on in my environment
Mhm.
that I'm doubting myself? Because every time I go into this process, knowing and in service and in gratitude, and that's why the ceremony is so important as for
Mhm.
you setting the boundaries and working with spirit in a very a ritualized way, because it sets up that space where you've done the preparatory work, therefore it is,
Mhm.
and you just allow, and that's
Yeah.
what play
Good
comes
word.
in, because a child can, and I think of my toddler often when I get into these little moods, because a child can get angry or sad, and then all of a sudden they're like, pivot, pause, okay, I'm happy now,
Yeah.
and that's kind of like when I'm having those moments, it's like, okay, clear that, move on, like, that there is this place that you go, and it's always there. It's just that very human tendency to kind of get stuck in the, this side of the veil.
Yes.
And it's just so easy to do. And I mean, in our day to day existence. And I mean, I still, when the funny part about when you think you're making like clients will send you something and be like, oh my gosh, this happened. Then you're like,
Yep.
wasn't making it up.
Yes, I was just telling some friends about that last night and, look forward to sending them your interview because it's interesting how we were talking about all of the stuff that you and I have been hitting on, and this is sort of I was telling them that, and I said, "I keep" when you get in your mind and you're reading someone and you think, "I just want that mic drop moment." I'm trying so hard to get this validation. I want them to show me the the pink lizard. And I have been studying at the Arthur Finley College where I'm learning to just let go of trying to find what's their name, how did they pass? I mean, those things will come to you, but the
Mhm.
way it works better is when you just I love the word that you used, allow, and focus on the feeling and trust the feeling, because I've always been a very analytical person who wants the facts and I want the figures and I want to know how old were they when they died, what were their symptoms, what did they do for a living, and those things are great for validation. But when you just allow and you just start talking and saying, oh, I know that your aunt is here and she passed from cancer, and you think, but I'm not seeing this. I just am knowing it. That it actually resonates more with the other person and they feel they're really connected with them more. And so it's such a lesson in trusting that we are spirit. Therefore,
Mhm.
we should have no problem connecting with spirit. And
Mhm.
we are spirit. So we're just communicating naturally. So I find it very interesting too when I keep looking for those. I want to see it. I want to hear it. I want to know it. And the more that I'm learning to just sort of relax into the process and say, just trust what I'm getting and get out of
Mhm.
that headspace that says, what if I'm wrong? Because guess what? When you don't worry about that, you're not wrong. I mean,
Mhm.
you might, and if you are, it's not because of anything. It's because you're doubting yourself or you're misinterpreting it, but it doesn't mean that you're not connecting. And I find that so interesting, as you said, to just be in the knowing that
Mhm.
why should this be any more difficult than just having a conversation the way that you and I are? And once you surrender to that,
Mhm.
that's when it all starts to flow beautifully. And I just think that's changed my life. And it's
Oh.
also, and I'm actually about to ask you this, what I have learned to navigate as and now I'm in my 40s too. So it's like, oh, wow, if I knew all the things I know now,
Mhm.
my 20s and 30s would have been a breeze because now when things happen, I can say, oh, but this is part of the flow. This is, and the grief I'm enduring right now, that's all part of it. And it's part of the forward momentum and it's part of the journey. So I would ask you, you've said a lot already that sort of answers this question, but how would you say that having had a near death experience has changed your perspective of life, I mean, the most? And I know that's hard to be succinct about, but And how do you see things differently now? And how does it help you better navigate the flow of life, the ups and downs?
I think it validated a truth that I and so many persons like myself, yourself, my son, who is a empath and HSP as well, that we're born with, which is that the unseen, the felt,
Yeah.
the inner knowing, the things that bring us joy that are so far removed from what we're conditioned to experience joy with. Seriously, the littlest thing, a child picking a daffodil,
Mm.
skipping through the grass barefoot, these very simple pleasures that we innately engage in as a child, but we lose a lot as we grow up.
Yeah.
That's really where the magic is. I mean, and we lose touch with that. So I feel like my NDE just made me re-aware that we all have this capacity to see beyond the veil. We're born with it,
Mhm.
but it's often indoctrinated out of us. And a beautiful example of that is my son has just now turned 8, and but research shows that if you make it past 7 with like your past life memories intact, with your ability to see auras intact, with most of your psychic gifts intact, you will likely keep them intact as long as you continue to engage them. So it was
Mm.
very important to me when he started showing his proclivity to the gifts to engage him when he asked, not to force them
Right.
upon him like religion was forced upon me, but to allow the unfoldment if he wanted it. And he was thirsty for it, and he took it at every opportunity he could. And so now it's fascinating because he'll just like come in and he'll be like, I observed yada, 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 yada. And he's like, it gave me this really difficult feeling, but that has not occurred in this life. So I'm either tapping into the collective heartbeat because there's so much pain. He's like, or it was a past life. I'm going to go meditate on this.
That's amazing. I
So
love
he
him.
like goes to his room. Or like his brother just turned 4 and he is the most highly spirited, like just autonomous rebel little soul. And he doesn't like to listen or follow orders or whatever. And yesterday he goes, and he took this deep clearing breath, a shamanic breath, and he goes, leave. He's like, my human wants to say not nice things. He's like,
This is
but my
great.
soul knows that God made you like this and that this is exactly how you're supposed to be. And you're teaching me something. I'm going to go learn in the other room so I'm not annoyed.
Wow, Brooke. Oh my gosh. Great parenting. But also I know that you're cultivating what's already there, but that is so awesome. I love that.
Oh, trust me, we have the other side of those moments too. But it's
Yeah.
two beautiful examples of that, and my son, the eldest, another one, a thing that's great about that is when the movie Soul came out
Yeah.
recently, he was like, "Mommy, is this really what it was like? Is this where it was when?" Like he was like, "Was I on the great beyond when I chose you?" And he had all these questions,
That's so
and he's
cool.
like, how wonderful is it that you don't have to explain to kids what a near death experience is? Pixar did it for you.
Oh my gosh, they're the best. That's so
So,
cute.
but I mean, really, it's just that the world's shifting. I mean, just to
Yeah.
think that like Netflix right now has a special
Mhm.
on NDEs,
Yep.
we're all speaking about it on the internet, whether it's magic, mediumship, NDEs, all the mystical experiences, the transpersonal. We're openly speaking about it. And it's not just getting people's attention, it's helping them get through a pandemic that has suicide and relapse rates that we have not seen before.
Mhm.
So, if by sharing these stories, we can bring just a smidgen of the light that we've experienced into the collective, then that's it. I mean, I was terrified to talk about this stuff for almost a decade. And
Yeah.
now every time I do it, I'm like, why was I so scared of that? It's
No.
beautiful. I
Yeah.
mean, it makes me feel good. And then the emails you receive and the feedback I'm sure you get from your
Yeah.
channel, it's it really is an emotionally corrective experience for a lot of that pain we went through in our early empath and HSP years. And for the people that aren't maybe as cognizant about it, we are shifting, we are evolving, we are in an ascension process. What has happened to me and has happened to you and is happening to my son will be happening to us all. So on some level, we all have that gift. And so for us to start to really open that door to, we're evolving. This is exciting. This isn't
Mhm.
something to fear. This is something to say, like, we not only are we in this pivotal moment in history that we chose to sign up for, and there is a team here. Thank you, Spirit.
Yeah.
We get to be part of reauthoring that history. How exciting is that?
I love that's the perfect place to wrap up because that's why I'm doing this, even
Mhm,
not being a near-death experiencer, but it's something that is I'm so excited about. I'm so passionate about. It's for a while, it's all I wanted to listen to and read and think about, and why I called it Magic is Real, because I also was mainly agnostic and at times atheist, and when you realize that there's so much more going on, but that people are catching on. And when I didn't initially want to do this particular topic. I wanted to do a recovery podcast,
mhm,
only because I thought, well, other people are doing it. Well, people think it's weird, and yeah, it's niche. It is
mhm,
a niche thing, but people are so fascinated by it and curious about it that even people I've spoken to, my friends who previously were some atheist or agnostic, have started to go, you know what? That's actually really interesting. And I know you to be a very rational person. So I'm actually, you've kind of opened my mind about it. But more
mhm,
than that, I thought people were going to be negative. I thought, oh, I'm going to have to read negative comments. And as an
mhm.
HSP, that's going to hurt my feelings. I have not received a single negative comment yet. Granted, I'm not in the thousands and thousands of subscribers yet, but it's all love, and it's these beautiful letters that I get from people, and it's just these people that say, "I watch every episode," or I listen to it because it resonates, it means something to me, it gives me hope, and so that's why I thank you especially because I know you have told this story countless times, and every time you bring to it the same enthusiasm, the same passion, the same love, um, when you tell your story. And I know it's a lot of energy and you're giving so much of yourself. And I just want to thank you for showing up for my project, but also for everyone else's because I've listened to a lot of your interviews and every time I get something different out of it. And I know this is one I'm really excited to put up because I think it's so clear that you're such a rational, grounded person and an academic, and to hear it from someone who is so grounded, I think it really, makes it more relatable for people to understand. You're speaking a language that I think is very relatable, in a way that's very relatable. So I just thank you so much,
Thank
because your message
you.
is really important, and I'm just so grateful to have connected with you.
Thank you, and likewise. And
Thank you.
and on that closing note, I say bring on the skeptics. They're my
Yeah.
favorite people to work with.
Yep. Yep.
Because I think it's healthy.
Mhm.
Like when people are like jumping in full throttle, I'm like, okay, hold on. Like I
Yeah.
really want to. It's good to have that, like, a little bit of ambivalence as you're
Mhm.
trying something new. So I've been very excited by the amount of medical doctors and psychologists and people that I did not think would come my way that have come to
That's
me
great.
through YouTube. So I am so grateful to everyone like you who's putting themselves out there, offering their stories, being bold and brave, and bringing so many different types of people onto your shows. So thank you so much for letting me be amongst them.
It is such an honor. Thank you, Brooke. Be well, and I know we'll be in touch.
Most definitely. Thank you, Shannon.
Thank you, Brooke.